the conviction that exchanging experiences is the first condition and the best guarantee for common progress. But the prerequisite is to be fully apprised, fully informed of the other systems, features, outcomes. This is the origin of the Observatory of History Teaching in Europe. Under the aegis of the Council of Europe, and you recall that, Stephen, rightly, late last year, 17 countries decided to set up this observatory. And let me take this opportunity to thank Russia, who was one of the first members to support what was an original French initiative, and to pay, let me pay tribute to the contribution by Alexander Chubarian and Olga Podbereskina. Hannah Makrianis, chair of the Scientific Council, and Aurora Ilinka, executive director, will elaborate on the expected role and the prospective methods of the observatory. I will insist on what is not meant to do. Unlike PISA rankings regularly carried out by the OECD, the observatory won't evaluate or grade our different education systems, let alone deliver good or bad marks to our students. History is human sciences. Likewise, the ultimate goal is not to come up with one single European account of the past, even less global, single global account. Education, the contents and methods to be transmitted to the younger generation is part and parcel of our national sovereignties. The observatory is tasked to observe and to report, to make a photograph of the state of play. Who teaches what and how in our classrooms at primary and second level. This comprehensive overview will be updated and released, not every year, but on a regular basis, like PISA, and for the first time in 2023. Established in a multinational framework backed up by the Council of Europe and their usual partners, e.g. the Euroclio network, complying with all scientific requirements, thanks to the role of the Scientific Council, this survey will be meant to be an unquestionable basis for all debates on the subject. But the observatory is only one element of a two-approach tactics. The complementary approach will be debated, with the view to communicating on the findings and securing the widest debate over them. We will stage a number of meetings, conferences, symposia, seminars, no matter the names, to comment the detailed features of the photograph. Various circles, academies, universities, teachers' unions, NGOs, media, parliaments, so that all stakeholders can have their say, exchange views, and are apprised enough to draw relevant lessons by taking advantage of each other's experience, successes, or shortcomings. I draw from yesterday's presentation by Alexander Chubarian that this Moscow Congress is not meant to be a one-off, but should be a periodic event. We are in for regular rendezvous between the observatory and this Congress, and I am looking forward to these further opportunities to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alain Lamassoure. I just wanted to also, because we have until like 11:40 for like some questions and answers, to seize the opportunity if people have like some more like questions for clarifications, because I think it's quite a feat to come with the idea. I remember very well, Alain, that we met originally, and you also, I applaud you for immediately engaging with the history teachers community by coming to two annual conferences of Euroclio already to have a debate and a discussion and to inform and to shape it together. But it was just an idea, and now we already have like an agreement by 17 countries. I'm really impressed by that. So I'm sure that people have questions. Let me see. I think for the translation, would it be possible for you to come here and ask the question in the microphone? I don't think we have a traveling microphone. So if you have.
Добрый день. Я хочу поблагодарить за столь интересный содержательный доклад и вчера, и сегодня Алана Ламасура. У меня вот какой вопрос. Здесь у нас присутствует очень много делегаций из Сибири. Одна только Иркутская область в 1,5 раза больше, чем Франция. На сегодняшний день у нас проживает большое количество коренных народов, которые занимали эту территорию, и в 16-м, в 14-м, в 12-х годах они продолжают заниматься своим традиционным промыслом, и они продолжают исповедовать свою веру. В советское время вопрос присоединения Сибири оценивался двумя категориями. Либо говорилось, что это присоединение Сибири, либо это оценивалось как освоение Сибири. Вы вчера подняли такой интересный вопрос, как сейчас преподавать вот колониальный период Франции, Англии, Голландии и других государств. Что колониальный период дал тем странам, которые появились на современной карте мира? А все-таки это было благо для них или это было несчастье для них? У нас после 1991 года поменялись некоторые исторические оценки. И в том числе был разговор о том, чтобы ввести новое понятие и говорить о колонизации Сибири. Но наша колонизация несколько отличалась от тех целей и задач, которые были у европейских стран. Поэтому мы бы хотели, вот мне было бы интересно узнать, как оценивается присоединение вот наших больших территорий, которые сейчас входят в состав России, с позиции европейской науки. Спасибо.
Alain, I can repeat the question if you like. So there was, and I'll try to paraphrase, so perhaps you can also listen to the translation so that I put your words correctly. So the speaker thanked you, Alain Lamassoure, for the words that you shared today and also during the opening, where she highlighted that in France and in the Netherlands and in several previous colonial powers, there's now this debate about decolonizing history. And she pointed out that herself, being from Siberia, and that there are many local people also within Russia who have different historical interpretations that, if I translate freely, that don't fit the official narrative or the Russian, the national interpretation. So it's a bit like you have sometimes people do things in history and it's the hero for one and it's the enemy of the other. So also within the nation there are different interpretations. So there was the question, I think, very specifically about how is this period taught also in other European countries. And I think these are exactly the types of questions that we hope to find out, but we would like to manage the expectations, and I don't think that Alain Lamassoure now has already the knowledge of how history is being taught in all those different countries, but it's a very interesting question to explore. But I think your contribution points out that history is indeed a different debate, the people interpret history differently. And perhaps if I can translate the question in something that I hope Alain Lamassoure will be able to answer, is how do we deal with the national narratives? Because you mentioned in the speech, Alain, that we say, okay, well, there are as many narratives as there are countries. And I think this contribution, and thank you very much for taking the floor and sharing your experience with us, shows that also within a country, there are different narratives, different ideas about what happened, different choice of vocabulary. That was also what Alain Lamassoure shared. So how do we select the facts? How do we select the people that we are talking about? And who do we leave out because there's limited time? On the basis of what do we do that? So could you react to that, Alain? Okay, what is there room for, even though there's sort of this is an agreement by states, the Council of Europe is a membership-based organization and the members are states. So how do we, what's the role of national narratives? Is there also room for people? Yeah, how would you like to address this? Because we see it everywhere.
Yes, thank you for your question. Thank you for the translation, Stephen. For your the evidence you give, the situation which is shared by many.
Alain, just one, because you cannot hear it, but you're not on the speakers here. Now you are.
Okay, I am. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I would like to thank you for the question and the contribution you gave to our debate in recalling that sometimes in the same country, due to the size of the country, in the case of Russia, of course, but it also happens in smaller countries. For instance, in a small federal state like Switzerland, they may be different narratives of the same events, and sometimes conflicting ones. It's odd, but it's the case. So the other countries may take advantage of the experience of the problem is dealt with in Russia or in Switzerland. To come back to Switzerland, for instance, it's amusing, it's fun. When I visited 2 years ago, Switzerland, and I toured the cantons. You know, it's a federal state composed of 24 cantons. I realized that even the birth of the Swiss nation was not recounted in the same way depending on the cantons. For some, original cantons of Schwyz, Unterwald, etc., were at the origin of the nation, dating back to the Middle Ages. For others, it was later in the Congress of Westphalia. So it's very odd, but it's the case even in small countries. And of course, as long as we don't get the first photograph, overall overview made by the Observatory, I have no specific response to this challenge. But in some countries, my feeling is that there are interesting experiments. For instance, in Serbia, the Serbian member of our governing board in the Observatory explained to us that 8 different cultural communities are legally recognized by Serbian law or possibly constitution, and they enjoy specific rights for instance, to teach also their regional languages and to teach their regional history. So they have already managed to make compatible different narratives inside the same country. And I will give you one example of a subject which could be selected, not in all European countries, but in many of them, to ensure we are able to make different narratives compatible. I asked the authors of a Franco-German textbook, which was drafted 15 years ago, and which proposes both to French and German students a common narrative, the same narrative for contemporary history, 19th, 20th century. I asked them what was the most difficult in your class. What was the most difficult? And to my surprise, the answer was, it was the narrative of the 11th of November 1980, the Armistice Day of the Great War, the First World War. Why? Because from the French side, it was a day of victory, and we commemorate it, we have been commemorating it for 100 years, more than 100 years now. But from the German side, this Armistice Day was the beginning of a huge misunderstanding which was at the origin of a flurry, a cascade of very dark events coming up with Nazism, Hitler, etc., the Holocaust, etc., etc. So to come up with a common account was very difficult. But then I tried to think over further. And my personal conclusion was, of course, maybe interesting for French and German students to listen to a common narrative, but a Franco-German narrative is not enough. It's not the idea of the Council of Europe. What would be far more interesting for, let's say, French students, is not only to know how this event was felt on the German side, on the side of the losers of the war, but also because it was the end of a world war, which unfortunately happened not in all Europe, not in the Netherlands, for instance, but in many European countries. It would be far more interesting to also to listen to the account of other important partners. This very day of the Armistice Day was felt very positively in Warsaw, a new independence for Poland, of course, in Bucharest, in Prague. It was the birth of Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, but it was felt very negatively in Budapest and in Sofia, Bulgaria, and in Austria, in Wien. It's amusing because it was not even mentioned in Austrian textbooks. And for Austrians, the 11th of November is the first day of the preparation of Carnival. So if we go to our final goal, again, I repeat, the final goal is not to come up with one single common narrative, but is to ensure that on important events, of course, selecting some particularly interesting and fruitful examples, we must make our students realize that the same events had different conflicting consequences. And so we must learn how to make the most of these differences, how to understand how it may explain the current situation or further developments, and how we can use these examples to strengthen our reconciliation, and again, not to foster or rekindle old resentment.
Thank you very much, Alain, for your elaboration. I would like to seize the opportunity to also introduce like a concept that the Council of Europe and Euroclio has been like working on for decades, and which I understood today is difficult to translate in Russian. That's the word like multi-perspectivity. We believe that a multi-perspective approach to the past can also help to resolve this issue. And I know it's a difficult word to translate because we worked with Alexander Chubarian on a resolution for this Congress, and also for the official representatives for the Council of Europe, Observatory and History Teaching in Europe. I'm pleased to let you know that the final recommendation that we propose is to attract other countries to cooperate with the Observatory on History Teaching in Europe, in addition to the 17 who are already there. I think there is not a lot to learn only for the Council of Europe countries, but also internationally. For example, already had a discussion on what can the United States benefit from this. But there, the only word where sort of our translation was not, they say, okay, well, this word doesn't really have meaning in Russian, was multi-perspectivity. So it's now translated as multi-factor approach to history. But a multi-perspective approach basically means that you recognize that history is being perceived differently. So that you look at sources that contradict each other, that you see when history happens, you already have like multiple stories. We all go home and we could give a different account of what happened here today. But also, when you establish the facts and you assign meaning, was it a good conference, for example? Was it an inspiring conference? Well, that's already where we start to disagree. So it recognizes that. And there is also something which I find very interesting for this observatory, is what I introduced during the speech in the opening session is, do we tell students what to think and already came to a conclusion? And in the case of this, then you would have to make a choice. Was it an annexation of Siberia or not? I think that students should know the different interpretations. Because I've been trained in multi-perspectivity, I know that events like this were very experienced differently. I'm sure that when that happened, there were some people who were very happy that the country expanded. But of course, if you're there and you're a minority group, you experience it very differently. You wouldn't be happy at all. So there are some questions that open up perspectives. So a question like what happened, there seems to be only one valid answer. You can still debate the evidence, who has the better argument. But if you have a question about how was it experienced, how did people react, then you can have much more voices. And then you can have all the sources that give an idea, okay, what were the different reactions to these events? So it's also really about methodology. And I think, do we use open questions? Are we using closed questions? The key is really, are we teaching students how to think for themselves? Are we enabling them to make their own conclusions? Or are we saying, this is what really happened and there is only one correct answer and you have to tell that? And I think this is also, this tension is why the Council of Europe, who are champions for democracy, human rights, rule of law, have been looking into history education since like the 1950s. And this is for the first time why it is like permanently on the agenda, which is why I'm so excited about this initiative. So I would like to use this also as a bridge to go to the next speaker, Gara Makriani.
Sorry.
Alain, please.
Yes. Steven, thank you. I will leave Gara Makriani to comment on your last very interesting idea or proposal, but maybe to come back, because I realize that I have not dealt with one of your initial question. 17 members, that's good, but what about the other members of the Council of Europe? And I thank you for this intention to encourage at the end of the Moscow Congress non-members of the Observatory to join. I am very grateful for this initiative. Well, what is interesting is that the principle of the creation of the Observatory was agreed upon by all the members, 47 members of the Council of Europe. But not all of them were prepared or wanted to join, at least to join right away from the beginning. Some of them prefer to wait and see, and probably they are waiting for the first report and its consequences of the observatory to be released. But there are, beyond the 17 members, other countries very interested with whom we are in close contacts, and all can be done to encourage them to join now before waiting for further developments, of course, will be particularly welcome. To mention but a few, Italy was very interested, but there were a change in government, and as you know, Italian politics, there are Italian members in this Congress, is very complicated, but we are hopeful that particularly taking advantage of the next Italian presidency, the rotating presidency, as you know, of the Council of Europe later this year, will allow Italy to take the final decision. And we are in close contact also with Germany. But in Germany, there is an agreement on the principle. Of course, they fully share our line of thought, multi-perspectivity. I don't know whether it's possible to translate it in German. Either way, in France, it is not translated. It's not understandable, but apart among the insiders, we all are. But in Germany, the problem is made more complicated by the federal organization of the Bund, and the fact that for Germany legally to join, we need both the unanimity among the 16 regions, Länder, in charge of education, the curricula and the statutes of textbooks, etc., and the foreign ministry, because the observatory is sort of international organization. In normal times, it should have been easier, but then the pandemic happened, and it was impossible for months and even more than a year to have direct contacts and to travel, to tour all the regional German capitals. So hopefully with the return to normal life now, we can resume direct contacts. But in the case of Germany, of course, we will have to wait for a new coalition in place before resuming useful contacts. And there is another white area on our map of the observatory, which unfortunately comprises your country, the Netherlands, dear Stephen, and the whole Scandinavia. And maybe there is one common reason for this reluctancy to join, which may be the different approach to the narrative of the past. Well, their membership of the observatory will be all the more welcome that they do have a different approach, which is closer to an acquisition of competences than an acquisition of knowledge and of the chronology of events. And well, if we want to make progress, we must again know our partners' experiences and try to make the most of all the successes and failures of the others. That's why I am now that the bodies of the observatory are now in place and we have adopted our roadmap, and Aurora and Hara will come back on this roadmap. My first personal priority as chair of the governing board is to enlarge the family circle and membership, and to ensure that the observatory represent not only some interesting countries, some parts of the continent, but all the different parts and all the different historical and cultural, including religious traditions of our so rich continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain. Okay, now I would then like to give the floor to Hara Makriani, the chair of the scientific board. So we can see you. That is wonderful.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Perhaps just, if you allow me, Hara, one practical thing, because I hear things quite well. I just want to make sure that it's possible to hear the interpretation in Russian when the sound is so loud, or is it difficult to hear? It's good? Okay, thank you. So, yes. Hara, we can hear you.
So, you can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Allow me to come back to multi-perspectivity later on. If I forget, to remind me. So, distinguished participants, dear organizers, coordinators, discussants, dear fellow history teachers, dear lovers of history, allow me this term. I'm honored and pleased to be communicating with you, especially after Monsieur Lamassoure described all these fascinating things that the Observatory is taking aboard. So I'm honored and pleased to be communicating with you on this fascinating opportunity and great occasion, the World Congress of School Teachers, History School Teachers, taking place in historic Moscow. Congratulations. My gratitude goes to all of you, and my special thanks to the Institute of World History of the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Russian Association of Teachers of History and Social Science, who are the initiators of the Congress. Congratulations. Special thanks also to the European Association of History Teachers, Euroclio, who is at the time being helping with the co-organizing. The number of participants, in their majority history educators from different countries, and the well-rounded, thought-provoking presentations shared so far in this most interesting Congress signify, I believe, the importance of this Congress of School History Teachers and highlights the need for cooperation across ethnic, linguistic, and other barriers, as many times has been emphasized by the previous speakers. The number of participants and the speeches heard so far highlight the need to engage in productive dialogue and freely discuss new methods of teaching history, share experience, and get acquainted with best practice from all over the world. I'm here to speak in my capacity as the chair of the Scientific Advisory Council of the Observatory on History Teaching of the Council of Europe. Allow me, however, to first share with you a bit of my personal history, or hair story, for you to witness multi-perspectivity in action, and also to witness how my quest for a better history education brought me here with you today. I come from Cyprus, another little island. Okay.
Ладно, все, пока. Нет, я же не дурачок уже, я вам говорю, что нет.
I come from Cyprus, a little island, and some of you might remember when Cyprus joined the European Union in 2004, it brought with it memories and denials of past conflict and division, intercommunal as well as intercommunal conflict, when a 180 kilometers buffer zone patrolled today by the United Nations force in Cyprus, dividing the island and its people. Notwithstanding many positive examples of coexistence and cross-cultural interaction we experienced in this country, Cyprus. A very characteristic example of this was the Association for Historical Dialogue and Research, a member of Euroclio and partner of the Council of Europe. Being a founding member of such a unique intercommunal NGO that builds bridges and unites educators and researchers across the existing divide in Cyprus, striving to overcome the island's division, I personally, like you, value greatly the knowledge that the Observatory on History Teaching in Europe brings into play. And I appreciate the valuable insights from the interconnection between policymaker, as described by previous speakers, NGO work, teacher training, creation of educational material, and actual classroom practice. Having served as a Euroclio board member and policy officer, representing in conferences and Council of Europe events both Euroclio and the association, I can safely today state that it was not only the teamwork and the collective decision-making, but also the high quality of discussions, the high level of research presented, the numerous opportunities to research, to network, to discuss that assisted our learning in every occasion. And indeed, it was in such events that I found people and organizations like yourselves with whom a common idea, a shared vision, the big picture, if you allow me, was and is communicated, just like the one described in the 2013 policy paper by the Association for Historical Dialogue and Research, just like the vision described in numerous Euroclio and of course in the Council of Europe recommendations and documents. And what is that vision? Let me once again share and repeat. The vision is to contribute in promoting an education a history education that prepares children and youth to live in a multicultural, multilingual society, to feel comfortable. How? By teaching children and young people of all cultural groups to grasp with multi-perspectivity, to question accounts in their textbooks, to examine contrasting evidence, as we heard before, whilst at the same time be sensitive to human rights, democracy, and social justice values, and helping us, teachers, to help our little ones become better skilled for participation in activities that promote historical understanding. I came across a vision that was shared in conferences such as this, that had a spirit of social justice, that talked about the spirit of social justice, as well as a strong bond of solidarity, locally and internationally. Valuable and essential in order to confront any ideologies and actions that promote one-sidedness, fanaticism, and a selective application of human principles and rights. A vision that describes an education that encourages a critical and self-reflexive understanding of the complexity of our history and avoids the tendency to essentialize culture, history, and identity in monolithic ways, especially in the context of history teaching. A democratic education free of any kind of discrimination, which engages students, teachers, and parents of all cultural groups as active members of society in democratic processes of decision-making in schools. A vision that welcomes a climate of democracy, collaboration, respect, responsibility, dialogue, mutual understanding from an early age. Yes, children can participate in dialogue, in debates. A mutual understanding that wishes to see children and young people actively involved in relevant activities, decision-making structures, and school-based and community projects. A vision that promotes the use of innovative history teaching methods to encourage participation, multi-perspectivity, empathy, critical thinking, cooperation, dialogue, active listening, problem-solving, inquiry, and respect for differences, that admires critical and empathetic thinkers, capable of dealing with conflict in a constructive way, both individually and as members of a group. Critical thinkers that comprehend and empathize with the consequences of racism, sexism, poverty, and strive to bring about change. Dear fellow history educators and dear history lovers, every teacher, every history teacher needs to be offered opportunities for professional development that takes into consideration their professional needs and interests and enhances their professional autonomy, leadership, and self-confidence. Universities, institutions, and organizations which have the responsibility for teachers and school leaders' professional development play a key role in preparing them to teach, lead, and live in a multicultural, multilingual society, irrespective of their gender, sexuality, ethnic, cultural, or economic background, or physical and intellectual capacities. Teachers involved in the designing of their own professional development. Further research and development efforts can clarify the content and structure of effective professional development, which take into consideration the emotional legacies of the past and the vision of educating our children and young people to live in a democratic society as described by Monsieur Lamassoure. And this is where the value of the Observatory on History Teaching in Europe lies. In November 2020, at the initiative of the French government, if you remember, among the priorities of the chairmanship of the Council of Europe, the Observatory was established as a new cooperation activity of the Council of Europe in the field of history education. Initially, as was mentioned before, with 17 member states, the Observatory operates as an enlarged partial agreement. The Observatory builds on nearly 70 years of work carried out by the Council of Europe in the service of history education, while complementing and strengthening its intergovernmental program. All these texts produced during the 70 years, documents, recommendations, and resolutions, comprise only part of the resources available on the topic. And yes, multi-perspectivity is one of them. And let me here note that one of the aims of the Scientific Advisory Council is to assist the creation of the regular report guidelines. And one of the major themes in this report, which will be later on taken on by the group of experts, rapporteurs, will be exactly to look into issues of multi-perspectivity and how this is taught or approached in various countries. But let me go back to all this amount of work that has been carried out by the Council of Europe. It is available online. It is available on the History Teaching webpage, and I take this opportunity to urge you to serve and have a look at it in case you have done that already. That's beautiful, but many questions asked during this conference could be clarified by further research through these documents. Let me now talk a little bit about the aim of the Observatory. The aim of the Observatory is to promote practices encouraging history teaching and learning to strengthen and promote the values of the Council of Europe, as mentioned earlier. Specifically, the task of the Observatory is to set, to collect, process, and make available factual information on the ways in which history is taught in all countries of the large partial agreement, and we heard Monsieur Lamassoure talking about more countries joining in. In doing so, the Observatory pays particular attention to ensuring that its activities are based on a solid scholarly and academic basis, takes due account of the diversity of education systems in member states, and ensure complementarity with the Council of Europe intergovernmental work on history education. It does not, I emphasize, aim to harmonize curricula. To perform this task, the Observatory is in the progress of preparing, as mentioned earlier, to conduct a series of regular studies leading to reports on the ways in which history is taught in all member states of the enlargement agreement. It also aims to conduct thematic studies leading to reports on specific issues of history teaching with a view to exploring these issues in more depth and to considering topics not included in regular studies. And this Congress could be a good opportunity to explore what other issues could be discussed. Another aim is to have previous discussions in the Committee of Ministers and the Steering Committee for Education, Policy and Practice that suggested the regular reports. And through these suggestions, one of the aims is to survey and compare approaches to history teaching in all countries of the Observatory. So the question about ourselves and the other is part of one of these surveys that will be shared in all countries of the Observatory. Over time, another aim, over time, the series of the produced regular reports will provide a unique longitudinal study on how history education has developed in Europe. The reports will not be limited to merely formal and structural issues, like, for example, the numbers of hours devoted to history teaching at different levels. On the contrary, they will focus on a broad range of topics and comprise several elements such as curricula, thematic focus, transversal competences specific to the discipline and preferred pedagogical practices. Another aim of the Observatory is to organize meetings and conferences in order to assist in the preparation and dissemination of reports. Last but not least, The aim is to serve also as a platform for the Observatory's partner institutes and European professional associations, Euroclio being one of them. Now, Monsieur Lamassoure mentioned a few things. Let me once again clarify the role of the governing board. The governing board is the Observatory's decision-making body, composed of one representative from each member state. The board defines and adapts the medium-term and annual programs, monitors their implementation and the management of the Observatory's resources. The Scientific Advisory Board, of whom I'm a member, is composed of 11 academics and history educators in the fields of history teaching and learning, and was elected by the governing board pretty recently on 4th of June 2021. Our work as a scientific advisory council is to ensure the academic, scholarly, and methodological quality of the observatory's work. The Council is consulted on the Observatory's program and assists the Governing Board by delivering opinions or any other matter concerning the Observatory's activities. Preserving democracy. Why does history education matter? This is not the name of a discussion that I'm putting in front of you. It's the name of the annual conference that will take place on the 2nd and 3rd of December 2001 in Strasbourg and online. It was mentioned before, but again, I take the opportunity to repeat that is the Council of Europe Observatory on History Teaching in Europe first annual conference. It's an event, just like this Congress, that aims to bring together more than 150 participants and allow education professionals, government representatives, and other interested parties to engage in high-level debates on the state of history teaching and related policies. History reflects our shared past, and the Observatory intends to showcase how history education can help Europe and beyond work towards building a more open and inclusive society, one where all of our histories are heard equally and where debates can find the space to exist. This annual conference that I mentioned earlier will facilitate this engagement by creating a platform connecting different organizations and networks of experts in the field of history education during an international event hosted in Strasbourg over 2 days. Organized around 3 main plenary sessions, the annual conference will also provide a unique opportunity to fully showcase the work and goals of the Observatory to future members and partners. Taking advantage of the Council of Europe's strategic positioning in Strasbourg, the annual conference will involve local stakeholders such as public authorities, schools, institutes, and museums. They will sponsor a series of side events in line with the core program and objectives of the conference. If you understood, what I'm doing right now is I'm like inviting you. We look forward to seeing you all there. It will be the perfect continuation, the perfect follow-up to this wonderful experience, to this beautiful Congress that is happening here, there in Moscow. I would like to conclude therefore my speech with the following. Historical thinking enables us to understand
I'm sorry,
not only...
Gara, because
yes.
I think like you gave a very good overview, but I'm conscious about the time.
I'm finishing right now, Stephen. Thank you. Just a few minutes. Thank you. Historical thinking enables us to understand not only people in the distant past, but also contemporary people living next or far away from us. By learning to think historically, we also learn to understand one another, accept and cooperate with each other. So thank you once again for granting us the opportunity to present the work of Scientific Advisory Council of the Observatory on History Teaching in Europe. See you in Strasbourg. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that, Gara. I think we will also share like the information about the conference because it will be online. So I think there will be also the opportunity for more people to participate. Being conscious indeed, and apologies for the interruption, I wasn't sure like how long it would be. But I would like to give the floor now to Aurora Alenkai to give a presentation on how the observatory will be in practice. Do you think, Aurora, it would be possible to do that in 20 minutes? Because then we can like rearrange also the room here. And perhaps I would like to collect questions just in case there's the need for any short clarifications. But then do have the break. So I'm not sure if it's possible for the online, the official representatives to wait for, let's say, 20 minutes and then answer for the questions if there is anything urgent. But I do feel also feeling like the energy in the room, you can't see that, but it's quite a hot room. So that we can really have like a proactive session that I promised. Okay, Aurora, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. First of all, I will check with you if you hear me. Okay, everybody, so I'm
yes.
Sure that
the sound is good.
Sound is okay. It sounds good. Okay. Yes, I will not be very long because I had the privilege and of course the chance to have our president of the governing board, Mr. Lamassoure, and our president of the Scientific Advisory Council, Mrs. Macriani, that were presenting already the observatory before me. So I would like only briefly to remind again the place of this work in the Council of Europe, and to wrap up basically what has been said about his functioning with some maybe additional explanation about the internal structure of the observatory. Of course, I will also start by thanking the organizer for this very interesting event. And I would like to say hello to all the teachers, again for this World Teachers Day, to congratulate you, and to have a special also hello to my colleagues here present in the conference, the colleagues either representing the governing board or the Scientific Advisory Council or the Secretariat, because I know that you do not represent only the structure that you are part in, or the institution or the country in the observatory, but as mentioned by Hara before, you represent, I think, by your presence and the fact that you are part of the observatory, you represent our vision as well and our goal. And this is something that will, of course, make this dialogue much easier. To come back to the Council of Europe and the observatory, very briefly, I would like to come back to the fact that from the start, as it was stated in the European Cultural Convention, the Council of Europe, the organization, recognized the importance of history as a basis for the education of citizens of Europe, and the role that history has in bringing together people and establishing this mutual understanding and dialogue among different countries, different citizens in Europe. So several official texts were adopted by various organs of the Council of Europe. These are the Committee of Ministers, the Parliamentary Assembly, the Standing Conference of the European Minister of Education, and different departments of the Council of Europe. And as reminded by Stephen, it's in the 50s that the Council of Europe started the work on history education. So as a very brief reminder, because of course all this information is on the website as mentioned by Hara, in 1964 the European Cultural Convention has been signed, and that's what frames the Council of Europe work in education. And the first conference on history, the specific topic called the European Idea in History Teaching, took place in 1953. So it's really in the 50s that this work started, and until 1958, the Council of Europe organized 5 more international conferences to look at how history was presenting in some 900 of the 2,000 school textbooks then in use in the member states. Several projects were developed and implemented since then. The latest, Educating for Diversity and Democracy, teaching history in the contemporary Europe, for instance. And why I'm saying this is to remind that the topic of history teaching is part of the DNA of the organization, I would say. So having the observatory is not a new idea, nor is the observatory an artificial construction in the Council of Europe. It's coming as a natural development, and as a result of these years of work, of debate, on reflection on history teaching. So this is to position the observatory in the Council of Europe work. And what's important also to know is that the Observatory on History Teaching is not a project in the sense of limited in time project, but it became an institution within the Council of Europe. So we really hope that it will last in time and it will become full part of the Council of Europe. It is already with 17 member states, but our aim is really to move it to a much broader membership and have it as a permanent institution within the institution in the Council of Europe. Some words about the internal structure of the observatory. We always refer to the observatory as a body with 2 heads, I would say, and one is the political head, and this is the governing board. And the other one is a scientific advisory council, which is the scientific head. The governing board is the decision-making body, and in the governing board we have a representative of each member state of the observatory, and this governing board defines and adopts the medium-term and annual program of the observatory, and also assists and monitors the implementation and the management of the resources of the observatory. You heard at the very beginning of our presentation the president of the governing board, Mr. Lamassoure. We also have 2 vice presidents that constitute together with 5 other members of the governing board. Then the Scientific Advisory Council, I will not go into detail because you just heard from Hara the role of the Scientific Advisory Council. But basically, a scientific body of the observatory, it is there to ensure the academic quality of the work of the observatory. And the Scientific Advisory Council is always consulted on the content of the work of the observatory, and also assists the governing board in delivering the opinions that are related to the observatory's work. The Scientific Advisory Council is composed of 11 renowned persons in the field of history education, and it's functioning also with a chair and a vice chair. So we have with us Hara, the chair of the Scientific Advisory Council, and we have also a vice chair. And then the Secretariat, we are based in Strasbourg, and we act as a coordinator for the work of the observatory. We provide support to both the governing board and the Scientific Advisory Council, and we basically act as a chef d'orchestre, coordinating also the communication and the cooperation between the 2 statutory bodies, governing board and Scientific Advisory Council, but also all the work inside the Council of Europe with the Intergovernmental Program on History Education and with other different committees, for example, the Committee on Education Policies and Practices in the Education Department. So the Secretariat is based in Strasbourg, I think I said it, and we oversee and support all the operational work of the Observatory. For the operational work, again, it has been said, I will just conclude on it, because we heard that the Observatory's main purpose is to collect and make available information on the state of history teaching in the member states. So indeed, this is translated in the Observatory's program through the drafting of regular and thematic reports. So the Observatory collects the information and present it in what we call the regular report that is supposed to be updated regularly every 3 years in average. And in conjunction with this work on the regular reports, conferences, seminars, webinars will be organized among all the actors that work on history education, among academies, universities, National Teachers Association, NGOs, and of course, very important also to include media, national parliaments, decision makers also. So this is to allow people to look at the results of the report, to comment on it, to react in any way. So basically to take the results of the report and then use it. The thematic reports are completed by what we call thematic studies. The regular reports are completed by the thematic reports. So these are the reports on specific issues on history teaching, and this is really to explore this issue in more depth and considering that there are topics that are not always tackled in the history manuals. It can bring also an additional view on specific topics. And the first thematic report will focus on a highly topical question nowadays, how pandemic and natural disasters are reflected in history teaching. So this is the work of the first thematic report. And a second part, so the reports is one part, and the second part that is very important is the creation of this meta network, a platform of networks, which is very relevant for the dissemination of the findings as widely as possible. This platform of networks and organization interested in working on history teaching, it's also very important for the professional development and the networking for European professional associates and institutes. As it was mentioned by Hara, I will conclude with the annual conference. For us, the annual conferences are more than an event to show the work. They basically have two main objectives, and one is to indeed present to the public the results, the outcomes of the report and debate on this. And the second one is to keep the history education topic on the political agendas and over again remind the importance of the role of history teaching in preserving democracies. And this year, on 2nd and 3rd of December, we will have our first annual conference. Since we started this year and we did not advance with the collection of data and with the work on the two reports, this first annual conference will be first and foremost an exercise of promotion of the observatory and the vision and the goal of the observatory. But we structured the session in such a way that member states and non-member states of the observatory and different other participants can debate on not only the objective of the observatory and let's say the purpose of the observatory, but also on any question that is posed by the countries, as Mr. Lamassoure said before, that are waiting to see. So many countries, they have decided to expect, to wait for some results of the observatory and to see what does it bring, how it is done. So the relevance of the work should be also showed and brought in discussion in this annual conference. So the member states that want to join but are not yet in or convinced about the utility of the observatory could ask their question, be answered, and of course be convinced about the utility of the observatory. In conclusion, I will stop here also because of the time. I would conclude by saying that the added value of the observatory shouldn't justify its existence or provide comparative advantage with similar initiatives. Such an observatory is vital in the present context. It was underlined by the speaker before me, and it's always reminded in many of events similar to this one today. So we think that having it situated in an intergovernmental organization such as Council of Europe, it is highly advantageous because it shows the political will and commitment of the member states, and this is what we need for any societal transformation. We need the decision makers at the table with us. So we will continue to explain and promote the mission and the added value of the observatory in any opportunity, in any event. And soon, when we will begin to have to see the concrete results, we hope to be able to convince new member states to join this partial agreement and to increase our membership and impact. Thank you very much for your attention. I will stop here, and of course, I remain available to reply any question you may have.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Aurora. So we now have a better overview, but it was also a lot of information. So we would like to perhaps summarize now very quickly what the observatory is going to be. And please, Aurora, correct me if I'm misrepresenting the observatory. So there will be research on how history is being taught in all the countries of the Council of Europe. This will be presented in a report that is checked by a scientific committee. There will be 2 thematic reports and 1 regular report every 3 years. The first one is going to be on the pandemics, the thematic report, but we don't yet know the topics that will come. The thematic report has also not been written yet. So there is room for initiative to give input. What would you like to know about history teaching in other countries? And there will be events organized to share best practices. So, and this will be done on a permanent basis. Although I do understand that the observatory at the moment is in a pilot phase, if I read the documents correctly, that after the first report there will be an evaluation, are we going to continue? But of course we will do all our best to make sure that it will continue and that more countries sign up. So what I now propose to do is that we do a quick check to see who is interested to discuss which topic. Because we thought we would provide input on what can be in the national reports, the regular reports, what would we like to know about other countries. The second group would be about the thematic reports. So now we have pandemics, but what could other topics be? Let's say colonialism and empire, for example. And the third one is, what is the role of civil society? So, and perhaps connected to that, how do we use the fact that we are there meeting policymakers? How can we organize this session? So, who would like to join after we come back to the first group? Like the focus on like the research, the regular reports that are published every 3 years again, because this is the moment to give recommendations, to say, this is what I would like to know about history teaching every 3 years from all the countries of the Council of Europe. So who would like to join this first group? Okay, yes, 2. I think the questions we will collect, because there is also like the coffee break. So, but then we can already clarify them in the meantime, because I would like to really say, okay, well, this is still what we want to know, give the quick answers afterwards, and then really have time to debate. So perhaps, Katrin, could you help and explain it in Russian? So, the first one is the regular report.
Их 3. Так, первое будет обсуждать, что будет часть. Can you explain what this actually means?
Like the regular report is what we are looking at every 3 years. So how many hours do we have for history teaching? What is in the curriculum, for example? Not thematic, like pandemics, no content.
Значит, как рассказывали, обсерватория будет делать несколько репортов. И первый репорт – это регулярный, то есть сколько часов для истории, для преподавания и так далее, такие как бы методические вопросы, то есть регулярный репорт. Это группа первая, что должно обсуждаться в этом репорте, то есть это что мы будем дискутировать. Во второй группе это репорт тематический, то есть такие тематические вопросы, как, например, пандемия, то есть как проходило образование во время пандемии онлайн и какие другие темы надо обсуждать. Нет? Нет?
Это мы выбрали тему для того, чтобы посмотреть, как вообще пандемии были во всех странах. Здравствуйте. Хотела просто вам сказать, что вот вторая группа, она будет посвящена тематическим докладам. У нас есть регулярный доклад, есть тематический. И во второй группе, например, у нас мы выбрали на наших совещаниях тему пандемии, как она преподается в учебниках истории разных стран. Но интересно было бы собрать вас и посмотреть, узнать, а какую бы тему предложили и выбрали вы. Вот это будет вторая группа. А третья группа предлагается посмотреть, вот как эти доклады, регулярные доклады, тематические доклады, как они могут быть использованы неправительственными организациями или гражданским обществом, экспертами, историками, как они могут их использовать в своей работе. И поэтому мы попросили бы вначале ответить те, кто будут в первой группе, кто во второй и кто в третьей, чтобы уже когда вернулись после кофе-брейка, разделились на 3 группы.
So who would like to join group number 1?
Кто хочет в группу 1?
Yeah, okay. So, okay.
Так, кто будет в группе 1? Поднимите, пожалуйста, руки. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, so that's one thing. What then?
А где будут группы? Where will be the groups be here?
They will be here, and you just come here, back here. We'll explain.
Мы сюда возвращаемся после кофе-брейка и разделяемся на группы.
And group 2? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make this an interactive session, so I need your help, because it's difficult with the translation.
Да, вы могли бы сейчас остаться те, кто хочет, просто чтобы мы поняли, кто во второй группе будет.
But so perhaps if you are going to group B, group number one, please stand there.
They will come after.
They will come.
Because there.
That's fine. Observatory left, because we have enough people who can answer them, and I thought it would be good to do that in plenary.
Все понятно? Все? Никаких вопросов нет? Отлично. Тогда мы разделимся на 3 группы, которые уже нашлись. Первая группа здесь, вторая группа там, третья группа в ротунде там. Хорошо? В холле.
Okay, then I would just like to agree on the time that we're back, because it would be nice to hear from the different groups what we're all saying.
What time?
So let me look at the program.
До 1:30 идет сессия или нет? До 1:30, да. At 1 o'clock we come back?
Yeah.
Давайте встретимся здесь в час. Через 45 минут вроде. И можно как-то делить наши впечатления наших групп. Хорошо?
And then we'll also make the notes and share with all of you and bring it back to the people who will be in Strasbourg. So have a good discussion.
Хорошая дискуссия.
преподавания истории, для того, чтобы исследовать эти вопросы более глубоко и рассмотреть те вопросы, которые не включены в регулярные исследования.
Organize meetings and conferences like the one we'll organize in beginning of December, 2nd and 3rd of December in Strasbourg. And it's very important to assist in the preparation and dissemination of the report.
Также, что очень важно, организовывать мероприятия, конференции, для того, чтобы 2 и 3 числа, 2 и 3 декабря в Страсбурге, для того, чтобы готовить и распространять результаты этих докладов.
The last task of the Observatory is to create a platform amongst the partner institutes and European professional associations. Through this platform, not only the policymakers, not only the ministries and the associations, the teachers as well can have access to the outcomes of the observatory.
И последняя задача обсерватории – создать платформу для своих институтов и организаций партнеров. Посредством этой платформы не только политические деятели, но и учителя истории доступ к
writing down some topics that would be interested in you are teaching in schools. What topics would be you'd like to know that other countries teach? You can write down some topics that you teach and that you want to know how it's taught, how they are taught, like
Сейчас мы можем открыть дискуссию и записать темы, которые вы преподаете, и по которым вам интересно, как они преподаются в других странах.
По возрасту, маленькие, большие.
we have teachers of the secondary schools or primary.
Мы говорим сейчас о средней школе. Let it be secondary school.
Secondary school.
I would like to know that I was teaching history for over 20 years, and in fact feel free to say what you think about history, and also Christos is a historian, teaching history, and whatever you want, we are pleased to answer.
Я хотела бы добавить, что я преподавал историю So elementary school, do you have any teaching of history? How is it organized?
If we have time,
If we have time, we can show you what exactly we do in relation to observatory. Then, if we have time, we can do that.
Если у нас будет время, мы можем вам показать, чем мы занимаемся в отношении обсерватории, если будет время.
But in the next meetings, we could write down the topics that our colleagues are interested in to know.
Давайте запишем темы, которые вам интересны.
Then, the regular report will focus more generally on the state of history teaching in Europe.
Регулярный доклад будет больше посвящен вопросам общего преподавания истории в Европе.
History curricula,
Учебный план преподавания истории,
teaching practices,
учебные практики,
and the learning outcomes in the 17 member states of
introduces these historical topics. In our country, because of the political problem, we use the multi-perspective approach.
У нас в стране из-за политических проблем используется многоаспектный подход.
And it's not so easy because children have a different political and ideological background, so they don't always agree with the official view of history. They bring their unofficial family history in the school, and these two histories are contradictory.
У нас в стране у детей есть свой взгляд, который они взяли из своих семей, своя культура, и поэтому у них есть позиция, которая противоречит нам.
Let's go on. The first report shall be drafted over a longer period of time and is intended to be finalized by May 2023. It will then become the focus of the annual conference, and for the regular report, up to 5 experts are expected to be hired to run the report.
Первый доклад будет готовиться дольше. Мы завершим его в мае 2023 года. И затем он будет обсуждаться на ежегодной конференции в 2023 году. Что касается регулярного доклада, то ожидается, что доклад подготовит легкий систем. So are you going to prepare your report only on the basis of Cyprus, your system?
Yes.
Or will you have any parallels and compare your country to other countries?
Yes, the last point the show was about the parallels. Yes, we have some parallels with Greece.
У нас есть некоторые параллели с Грецией.
The report of Obsерватории.
Certainly, that's why I asked it, because we have a lot to do with Greece. We can't prepare a report separately from Greece. Да, но у нас отдельное государство и отдельная другая государственная. И поэтому мы готовим отдельно для своей страны этот учебный план. Я вам покажу. Продолжим.
Both group of experts under the scientific board we work in cooperation with the Scientific Advisory Council. We will approve their reports prior to their publications and the dissemination to the countries through the meetings and conferences.
Обе группы экспертов будут сотрудничать с научно-консультативным советом Обсерватории, который утвердит доклады по их публикации.
Yes, every country can make a report.
Every
Every member
member state.
state will report.
Вот они объясняют, что у нас будет доклад по Кипру, но на самом деле каждая страна член обсерватории, которая сейчас по презентации закончим, мы будем отвечать на ваши вопросы.
The regular reports that, as you shared previously, such as workload,
формальным аспектом, таким как рабочая нагрузка,
sources, primary, secondary, visual, etc., study material and teaching practices,
источником материалов исследований и практикам преподавания
and the teacher's training.
и обучение учителей, подготовку учителей. What is the democratic culture? What do you mean by competences?
Okay, for example, the skill of our students to make the discussion, to agree or disagree, to a historical subject, and to give their personal views.
Это такие навыки наших учеников, как способность вести дискуссию, соглашаться, с чем-то не соглашаться, обосновывая свое личное мнение. So it's like communication skills.
Yes, communication skills. And to develop their critical thinking is
Также развивать
one of the competence.
тоже одна из
For example, we even can use contemporary material, for example, a newspaper, an article from a newspaper, to compare their present to the historical period that we teach.
Например, мы можем использовать какие-то материалы, даже статьи, чтобы сравнивать современный период с тем периодом, который мы сейчас изучаем. Yes, it's like archive. And regarding the workload of teachers, how do you distribute this workload?
We must say that it's a huge workload for our teachers, specifically in our country. We don't have only history teachers. We have philologists in Cyprus, teachers ancient Greek, modern Greek, and literature, philosophy, Latin, and history.
Надо сказать, что у нас стоит колоссальная нагрузка на учителей, потому что не только преподаватели истории, но и филологи, которые преподают древнегреческий язык, современный греческий, древнегреческую литературу, ну и как бы большая. И нужно все знать. In terms of the number of hours, how many hours does a teacher work?
He starts 24 periods for 45 minutes each.
24 урока по 45 минут каждый. What like say now? So it's over sometimes even 30 hours.
30 hours.
По 45 минут, да? Yes, 45 minutes.
After some, then this workload is until they are retired or it's reduced.
А вот эта рабочая нагрузка вплоть до пенсии сохраняется на том уровне. It can change from year to year, it can become bigger or smaller. Big or small.
They are heroes.
The regular reports will cover more generally as we more on the history of teaching practices and learning outcomes. And please share our experience from your experience from your
Регулярный доклад будет посвящен вопросам учебного плана по истории, учебным практикам и результатам обучения.
Give them some minutes to write down some topics that they would like to know about other countries.
Мы сейчас приготовим небольшой конкурс темы, которые вам было бы интересно, как они преподают в других странах.
so we use other educational materials, and we use primary or secondary sources, every kind of source, visual, written, etc. And we prefer not to give facts to the students, but our children work through these sources to have their own conclusions.
У нас есть какие-то учебники, но самое главное в учебном плане не только учебники, но и материалы, первичные, вторичные материалы, тексты, визуальные материалы. Мы предпочитаем не столько давать факты нашим ученикам, сколько давать им возможность работать с источниками и формировать свое мнение на основе этих источников.
In other words, the Ministry of Education also have some questions about some topics in Russian curriculum. As it concerns Ottoman Empire, we have some chapters about the evolution of the Ottoman Empire and the conquest of the Byzantine Empire. Of course, but we would like to know if they include in Russian curriculum Byzantium and Russia, and we're very interested in knowing about Russian Revolution. How do they manage to teach this very sensitive issue, as I imagine they are children from different ideological backgrounds? I don't know. For example, when we teach Russian Revolution, we have children from left families. We have children from right ideology families, and it's let's say a controversial issue for us. Is the same.
We don't have any left or right language for a long time.
They all agree.
Мы изучили в контексте исторических фактов и событий, анализируя все политические и сложные процессы, которые происходили в нашей стране, коснулись ее вообще влияния и обстоятельств характера.
We analyze the actual information of what happened.
No, let's go on. I don't know if we want to learn more about our education system. And I will try to show
Related with the observatories
observatory, yes, and our targets and methods.
Ну вот если вам интересно еще
I
немного
don't
о
know
нашей
if you
системе
want to,
образования,
yes.
Pose a question to the each one side first. If I got me wrong, you avoid to tell stories. You focus on the kids, right? The kids, the learners, construct their own stories based on materials. If I got you right.
И вопрос коллегам из Кипра, как я понял, вы не рассказываете историкам, а делаете так, чтобы они сами я сейчас расскажу, как наша система работает. Если я в рамках этой презентации не отвечу на вопрос,
Let's start. Here we have the ages on high school and elementary school. The elementary gymnasium 12 to 15 and gymnasium 15-20.
с возраста 12 по 15 гимназия, с 15 до 18 лицей.
And the Minister of Education was visiting a school during the pandemic period.
Во время пандемии министр образования посетил школу.
Okay. These are the aims. I think direct lectures, translate direct on the different
Цели курса истории можно прочитать,
I would, yes, you can read. I think for direct it's okay.
общие цели курса истории, прежде всего,
Okay. besides teaching the subject of history,
Приобретение массы исторических знаний, стать активными демократически настроенными гражданами и культивировать, развивать навыки, относящиеся к историческим знаниям, критическому и творческому мышлению.
okay, can we go on? Would you like to say something? Yes?
Where I come from, it's very important we teach to respect different cultural identities within my country because it's such a controversial issue.
Yes. И дополнение от Джеймса у нас в стране очень важно учить уважению к различным культурам и культурным группам.
Yes, we want to create citizens proud of their country, but not racists or nationalists.
Да, мы учим наших учеников, чтобы они гордились своей страной, но при этом не были националистами.
I live in a country where 40% of the citizens are not proud of their country and want to be part of different countries. On the same island.
У меня в стране 40% людей говорят, как отлично,
So one of the tasks of Observatory is to collect these general names of all the participant member states and possibly make a comparison.
Одна из целей обсерватории — собрать вот эти цели обучения в разных странах, может быть, сравнить их.
And as Karamakoyani said before, the objective of observatory is not to harmonize curriculums, but to collect information and to see what the other country has goals for this.
Как моя коллега сказала раньше, цель не в том, чтобы гармонизировать учебный план, сделать их учебным, а в том, чтобы собрать информацию и сравнить.
После Советского Союза некоторые бывшие республики, эти, кто воевал против красных, они даже не нужны, как национальные герои. А в России, например, в России так решают дети, чтобы эта эпоха истории мы не можем односторонне не можем.
So there was a question after the Russian Revolution, there was the red camp and the white camp, and in some former Soviet countries,
develop the historical consciousness, as we said before.
Вот этот новый аспектный подход, попытка учителей воспитать вот эту осознанность исторической информации.
And this, I will go on with the activities for historical skills, matching, type of questions with
Вот различные активности, мы задаем вам такие вопросы, сопоставить слева и справа.
correct and wrong, multiple choice.
Вот это вопросы на тестах, которые мы задаем, угадать правильно или несколько вариантов.
This type of questions
Вы тоже используете такие вопросы? Yes.
just go on.
Yes, and in the final school exams we have
Okay, and classification also.
классификация, тоже
Historical text, this is the source.
исторический текст, это
Primary source, presentation and evaluation.
первичный источник, презентация, оценка.
And historical proof, as we said before. Yes. Historical evidence. Yes. The observation of the icon is very important for us.
Это очень важно для нас.
And the computer.
I would just like to check if the plan is still to share like the outcomes of the group with the plenaries. Okay.
And the conflicting resources.
Противоречивые между собой источники.
Digital material. This is our web page where you will find digital Herodotus is full of documents and icons.
Материал
Lectures
цифровой Геродот, там
about
материал,
history.
лекций.
This is digital newspaper, old newspapers from 1875. The timeline, you can see the timeline. And the exercise artifacts, yes.
Вот древние артефакты.
Yes. And this educational program, we will have another one. This is for the Queen Catherine Tornaro from Paris, and the webinars and so on, just to give and to support all the teachers and the students also.
Материалы с помощью учителям. Yes, yes.
Okay, encyclopedias, virtual reality. Do you know the Assassin's Creed? What the children play. Yes. Now we will go on. These are our groups about cycling. And this is the new online zero, grade A, grade C, history of science.
And I'm sorry, first it's grade 8 and B and then C. То есть там уже называется класс.
And Christos is the writer of this book.
Let me see if it works. No. Would you like to join the circle? Please? Yeah. It should work now. Okay. We also have the headsets. So for because the interpretation is now back, we are going back in plenary mode. Yeah, if I can invite everyone into the circle, that we can all see each other. We're one group. So I was glad to see some genuine dialogue going on, some exchange. So thank you for everyone who also helped with the interpretation to make this exchange possible. But I'm very curious what happened with the different groups. So if I can invite, so the idea is to actually give the floor now to the representatives of the different groups so that we can learn about the discussions. So I think I can give you the floor for the first group.
Hi, in our group discussion, we had to present the content of regular reports and the specific goals of the observatory. We did that through a PowerPoint, and this was a good start for our discussion. Our colleagues from Russia had some questions, such as what's the percentage of facts and discussions in the classroom, and about the workload. We're very concerned about how many periods we teach in other countries, like our country in Cyprus, per week. And we found out that our colleagues in Russia are heroes, as they have to many hours per week. A main theme of our discussion was what topics are taught in other countries. And we had this conversation. For example, we discussed about specific topics such as Ottoman Empire, revolutions, Russian revolutions, World War II, etc. We also compared the levels and the stages, so in primary and secondary education, related to the national curricula. how immigration issues are considered in history teaching. Another issue was the type of questions. We found out that we use many similar types of questions, so we are very close to in evaluation, and the problems, of course, of this evaluation. And let's say we concluded that the elements that unite us in content of the history and our methodology are much more than elements that are different. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So very interesting takeaways. So can I give you the floor, Olga?
Thank you everyone for participation in our roundtable discussion devoted to the thematic report. And we had very interesting topics. For example, the new topic that I have never heard during our sessions in the observatory, like child as a subject of history in the history books. That's very interesting. How many history books we have where we address to children from children. Yeah, and also very interesting topic was integration and disintegration in Europe, because we know that USSR was disintegrated. Now the European Union has many processes of integration and disintegration. So it would be interesting to see how how in different history books we can see it. But also there was the question of the science. How is the science, especially the different nation science, for example, like how Arabs made something great for the world, and how Chinese made something great for the world, and do we really have this in all the history books? The history of religion was also the topic, because in Russia, we all know the history of religion, but as we learned from our roundtable discussion, not in many countries, other countries, there is the history of religion. So it could be also interesting. But one topic that we all agreed that is the most important, but you must know that most of the people who were in the discussion, they were Russians, so maybe because of this. But of course, number one topic was the lessons from the Second World War for the 21st century. Уроки Второй мировой войны в 21 веке это стало нашей такой самой большой темой, хотя было тем действительно очень много. И ребенок как субъект истории в учебниках истории, и интеграция и дезинтеграция в Европе. Да, история и история религий, потому что мы поняли, что не во всех учебниках европейских стран преподается история религий. Вот. Ну вот уроки Второй мировой войны в 21 веке, это нам кажется самое актуальное сейчас. Возможно, потому что у нас в основном были представители России. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the report back of the second group on the themes. A lot of work to do. So I'll report back on the third group. I think we had probably the most conceptual on the role of civil society. And we had, let me go back to the notes. Role of civil society. I'm sorry. So we started by basically pointing out that civil society can really play an important role of sharing the outcomes of the observatory, not only in the center, but also in the different regions. And there's also, there was a lot of attention for the involving youth. So it can be sometimes difficult for governments to directly reach youth. And it's easier for civil society because history education is not only about the teachers, it's also about the students. So to bring in those student voices, civil society can help. Then there was the recommendation to also involve journalists, because the example that we have of cooperating across differences and challenging stereotypes and countering the sometimes biased way in which others are presented in the media can help by working together and partnering with journalists early on. So that can also be a role of civil society. And then to showcase what is happening in practice. So, for example, we had an example of cooperation between museums and history educators and society. And to show how this is done in a concrete case study as an illustration of how history teaching is happening in the local level. And some challenges also emerged. So, how to teach hard topics, for example, but also how to organize exchange programs between students. And there, I think the observatory can help, and also civil society, that we show, okay, this is how it's done in a particular city. And then if you have 3, 5, 7 case studies, of course it gives an insight in, not a complete overview, but an impression of what are the hard topics, how it's being done, for example. And finally, I think it's important, very practical, that also civil society is invited to the meetings. Of course, the Council of Europe is it's an intergovernmental organization, so the members are the states. But I think in terms of really reaching the teachers, civil society needs to be represented, and also to make information accessible in the different languages, I think is also key. So again, more work to do. We will convene also, we will make a report out of this. I promise to share this with Alain Lamassoure, Harama Kriani, Aurora Alinkai, all the speakers, so that this was not just a nice opportunity to talk, to exchange, and to get to know each other, but that we're also really giving these recommendations to the people we were making the decisions. So thank you very much for participating. It was a pleasure. And also a big thanks for everybody who helped with the language and volunteered to do that. It was really appreciated that. Do you have the gifts for the speakers? Okay. And for the moderators, we have a small token of appreciation. It's a good Euroclio tradition to. We brought something for the people who are not from Russia, and but we also have some gifts that are specialties from the Netherlands. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.